Welcome to Goblin Hobbies. Today we're going to look at a bunch of ways that you can use stamps to improve your models. Patterns, markings, heraldry, all kinds of good stuff. We're going to be working on these Lamenters Space Marines from Warhammer 40k. I'm starting with a simple, clean base coat, and we'll use stamps to add a bunch of details. Lamenters are notoriously hard to paint, and we're going to dive right in on the hardest part, the chapter markings on the left shoulder pad. We need to make black and white checkers and a red bleeding heart. The Stampin' plate that we're using here is Squad Markings 01. I'm going to begin by using the black Stampin' color to ink up the checkers with the circle in the middle. We're using the plastic scraper to scrape away the excess, and then we'll use a light roll of the wrist to pick up the design. This gentle pickup is probably the most important tip when you're learning how to stamp. It's counterintuitive, but the lighter the pressure is between the silicone stamper and the steel plate, the better the chances are of getting a nice pickup of the design. After that light roll of the wrist, we check the head of the stamper to see if the design is there. If it looks good, we can go ahead and put it onto the model. Sight down the barrel of the stamper and give a nice firm press. The silicone will squish and conform to the curve of the shoulder pad. Hold it there for a second or two, and then lift straight up. There we go. This thin film of black checkers sticking over the edge is normal. You can tamp it down with your finger and it'll dry flat. Now let's do the bleeding heart. We'll ink up the icon with red Stampin' color. Scrape away the excess, gentle roll with the stamper, and check the head. If we picked up some adjacent designs, we can prune them back by stamping our own finger. Line it up. Nice firm press. Hold for a second or two, and then lift up. There we go. Not bad. Now let's take a second to clean up. We use 100% pure acetone on a makeup remover pad to wipe down the Stampin' plate. One quick swipe will take things back to pure steel. When I'm filming, I often do a second pass, but that's just to keep everything shiny for the camera. To clean the silicone stamper, you can use a bit of tape to lift away any lint or color that might have been left behind. The last thing to do on these shoulder pads is to paint the rims yellow. This actually takes longer than the stamps. Now, it was easier to paint these shoulder pads as a sub-assembly and glue them onto the model afterwards. Partially this is because they needed to start white and the rest of the model started yellow. Also, I didn't want to accidentally stamp checkers onto the helmet, and the backpacks on the Marines might block access to the back edge of the shoulder pad. We'll get those chapter insignia glued on, and for the rest of the stamps we won't use sub-assemblies. For the opposite shoulder pad, we'll give them a white arrow. From the Codex Astartes, that means that these are tactical battle line troops or something like that. Now, by the way, two of the very first colors from Goblin Hobbies were white and bright gray. Most of the time, if I want to add some white markings to armor, I'll actually recommend the bright gray. It's meant to register as white without being blindingly white. In this case though, we've already got pure white on the checkers, and the armor is already blindingly yellow, so I went ahead and used the pure white. Let's also put some numbers onto the shoulder pads. These Roman numerals are from our Ancient 01 plate. There's a variety of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian stuff on there. These Marines are going to be from squad number 6. One Marine has a power sword, and it deserves to be crackling with electricity. We'll stamp a white lightning bolt onto the black sword. This Elements 01 plate has lightning bolts, fire, dragons, and sea life. The purpose here is to set up an undercoat of black and white. This is the type of use that we recommend the pure white Stampin' color for. I'm also using a white dry brush to establish a gradient between light and dark. We want the edges of the blade to be nice and bright. The next step is to add a transparent color over the top. Here, I'm using red speed paint. Now this looks alright, but the red was more opaque than I was expecting. I actually went back and added more white lightning bolts, brightened up the edges again, and then glazed over with a thinned down yellow. And yeah, this is the effect that I was going for. Power swords look great with these glowing lightning bolts. Another fun option would have been to stamp some magical runes onto the sword. Next up, let's add caution stripes to the chainsaw. There are some good stripes on the Industrial 01 plate. The outer surface of the chainsword is nice and accessible, but the backside is just a little bit hard to reach. We're going to experiment and try something unorthodox. We'll ditch the handle for the stamper and work directly with the silicone. We'll start by stamping one side of the sword and then wrap the stripes 90 degrees and 90 degrees again all the way around to the backside. This mostly worked, but one of the stripes came out a bit wonky. Ordinarily, a company wouldn't put a mediocre result into a video like this, but I think it's useful to see. This happens sometimes, especially when we're trying something new, where a stamp is like 90% of what we were going for. One option is to use the imperfect stamp as a guide and finish it up with a brush. I decided to use some black paint to straighten out the edges of those stripes. Alternatively, we could have painted over and tried again, or tried something else. There are many more places that we can stamp on these minis. Hearts and skulls and lightning bolts all look great on knee pads. The backpacks are full of dangerous technology, so we can add some hazard symbols. Let's put a sweet dragon onto this helmet. Let's put some cool flames onto this ankle. Yeah, these Marines are looking pretty good. Lamenters can be a fantastic looking chapter, but they have a reputation for being hard to paint. Yellow is always a bit tricky, but the real challenge is the checkerboard. Adding to the challenge here is the complex curve of a Space Marine shoulder pad. The radius of curvature is 90 degrees top to bottom and 180 degrees front to back. You can put 4 of these pauldrons together and make a spheroid, a weird little globe. Translating between a flat image and a curved image is tricky. On a 2-dimensional map of the world, Greenland looks gigantic. It's not actually that big, but it's at high latitude and the map makers needed to distort something in order to flatten out the globe. Back to Space Marines, if we go to our library and take a look at White Dwarf issue 101 from 1988, Gary Chalk has drawn a Lamenter. The checkerboard looks pretty good, but it gets squirrely near the top. And here's an image from a tutorial on the Warhammer YouTube channel from 2024. The artist has carefully drawn longitude lines so that the checkers are actually trapezoidal. A checkerboard must deform on a curved surface, and here the artist has chosen exactly how they want that deformation to look. I think it looks great, but it does take a while. With stamping, we're taking the 2D image of a checkerboard, transferring it to the silicone stamper, and then pressing it onto the highly curved surface of the shoulder pad. As the silicone squishes and conforms, the checkers morph to fit the curve. The heart icon in the middle is a more straightforward use of these stamps. The relatively small area where the heart goes has a much gentler curve. An icon like this heart is basically an ideal use case. With the checkerboard though, we're pushing the limits of this technique to see what'll happen. As I was making this video, I ended up stamping 16 of these shoulder pads. I wanted to make sure that I got some good footage, I wanted to see how repeatable this was, and I wanted to do some time trials. Stamping is fast. It took me less than 7 minutes to stamp 6 shoulder pads with both the black checkerboard and the red heart, so it only took about 30 seconds per stamp. Of course, the checkerboards are all distorted. Geometrically, they have to be. Even with the distortions though, most of them still look pretty decent. Okay, no mercy. Let's zoom in on some of my worst stamps. First up, bad aim. The good news is that these checkers deformed in a visually pleasing way, but I had bad aim, and the circle is off-center. Interestingly, all 16 of the red bleeding hearts were pretty well placed inside the empty circles, but I was not always great at putting the circles in the middle of the blank white pauldrons. Live and learn. Next time I might try making a pencil mark in the center of the blank shoulder pads as a target. Next, this sickly looking specimen is also my fault. This came from a bad pickup. For stamping, we add color to the plate, swipe away the excess, and use a light touch to pick up the design. The next step is important. Check the head of the stamper and decide whether or not you want that on the model. There's a knack to getting good pickups. Sometimes they work great, and sometimes we get a stinker. If we get a stinker, we don't have to put it on our model. Take 30 seconds to reset and try again. Stamp a blank piece of paper to clear the stamper, or use a bit of sticky tape to lift the design off of the silicone. Wipe down the plate with acetone, and we're ready to go again. Back to this shoulder pad. I knew it was a bad pickup, but I used it anyway to see what would happen. This stinker is the result. Okay, I want to show you one more mediocre shoulder pad. This one is just bad luck. I had a good pickup on the checkers and I had decent aim, but the distortion turned out weird. With some practice, we could probably learn the best angle for squishing the silicone against the shoulder pad, but on a surface with this much curvature, there's still an element of luck. The stamps are durable, and once they're on the model, they behave like paint. They're resistant to both chemical and physical abuse. This is mostly a good thing, but if we get a stamp that we don't like, our choices are to either fix it with a paintbrush, or to paint over and try again. Zooming out, these 16 shoulder pads only took about 20 minutes of stamping. They're not perfect, but it's kinda wild that they're as good as they are. In this hobby, there are pros and cons to every technique. These Goblin Hobbies stamps are a decent solution to this particular challenge. Pad printing and tampography have been around for a long time, but this technique is definitely new in the world of miniature painting. It's fun to experiment and see what this tool is capable of. Alternative techniques for putting designs on things are freehand, 3D printing, decals, or stencils. Now there's nothing wrong with freehand. I applaud anyone with the skill and patience to paint a squad of Lamenters. As another option, there are folks like Pop Goes the Monkey who sculpt bits with patterns and icons on them. If you find a set that you like, the sculpted shapes can make symbols easier to paint. Of course, decals are a traditional way of adding designs to models, and in some situations they're great. They struggle a bit with curves though. Getting a decal to lay flat across the entire area of a shoulder pad like this is very tricky. Also, it can be tricky to hide the clear plastic sections of a decal, and a checkerboard could have a lot of clear squares that would need to be blended in with the undercoat. Stencils are another option, but again, getting a two-dimensional sheet to lay flat against a complex curve can be a challenge. Additionally, checkers in particular are a challenge for stencils for structural reasons. For a true checkerboard, the corners of the squares don't really touch. Stencils of checkerboard have to cheat a bit and have the squares connect, which is fine, but there's pros and cons to everything. All this is to say that Lamenters Space Marines have always been a challenge to paint. Stamping is a fast way to add the chapter markings to the shoulder pads. It's not perfect, but it's not too bad either. At the end of the day, stamps are just another tool in the toolbox, but this tool has some cool uses, and we're excited to share them with you. We're in the process of expanding our range and expanding sales to new regions of the world. Check out goblinhobbies.com and sign up for our newsletter to stay updated. Subscribe to this channel for more tutorials. And please, help spread the word by telling your friends about these stamps from Goblin Hobbies. Alrighty, that's all for this time. Thanks so much for watching.